Oh, hi there. Holly Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. This is a podcast about using your creativity to improve your life. We look at all kinds of philosophical and psychological and, dare I even say, spiritual topics related to the creative process and how that can help us to be more real or whole as human beings. If you don't know, if this is the first time you found the podcast, then welcome. My name is Holly Anderson. I am a creative performance coach. I help people to increase their realness in life and business. Realness is a concept that I've been talking about for years. If you want to know more about that, then keep listening to the podcast, or you can check out my book, Personal Revolutions, A Short Course in Realness, which is on Amazon and all those places. Each episode of the podcast, I interview somebody about life and creativity through the lens of whatever it is that they do. The main lesson so far has been that the creative process can literally be anything because everything we do is creative as human beings. And it's not about what we do so much as how we do it. Today's interview is with a lady who is a coach and a creative person herself. Her name is Haley Hoover. She is known online as the Sparkling Hippie, and there's a lot of sparkling, effervescent energy within this podcast episode. It's quite an energizing conversation. We cover all kinds of things related to human growth, wholeness, of course, because that's one of my favorite words. If you don't know, I think that we're constantly moving towards wholeness. That's what makes us real. Ultimately, though, the theme of the conversation is intuition. What intuition is, how we can tune into it, how we can use intuition to improve our lives, how intuition allows us to have better relationships with other people, how it puts us on this path towards wholeness, blah, 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 blah. Loads of amazing stuff in this conversation about intuition. So Haley Hoover, Sparkling Hippie, thank you so much for giving me your time and letting me ask you all these questions. Everybody else, hope you really enjoy the conversation, get some value out of it. And I'll see you next Monday for another episode of Creative Status. In the meantime, take it easy, and here we go. Boom. Oh, hi there, Haley. Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Creative Status. You are known online as the Sparkling Hippie, which is an awesome pseudonym. Before we get into asking you a bunch of questions about creativity and intuition, do you feel like introducing yourself and telling people why you are known as the Sparkling Hippie, if you want to do that, and also let us know what you're hoping to get out of this conversation as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. Great starter questions already. I get a lot of compliments on my business name, the Sparkling Hippie, but I don't always get asked where it came from, so I appreciate that. Basically it kind of just was dropped in. We'll talk about intuition and creativity as we get going, but it felt like it was just dropped into me more than a decade ago. I was hanging out with some friends and someone said, I've always been an artist. I've always painted. And they said, well, what would you name your gallery? And just like in an instant, I was like, oh, the Sparkling Hippie. And I was like, where did that come from? And shortly after, I was like, I really like that. It fits the essence of what I had. I had a blog, and that would become my business, and it just kind of fits the essence of all of my work, which is this. If you think about the hippies of the 60s and 70s, they were very free spirited. They were very opening up to new ways of spirituality. They were breaking a lot of cultural norms. The fashion was colorful for the first time. There was a whole tie-in to just authenticity, being who you really are, especially coming out of the 50s where it was very cookie cutter, right? And so really the essence of everything I do goes back to that, is just that freedom to be who you really are, whether it's in business or in my artwork or I do corporate art events, and that's the same thing. That it all goes back to that essence of just being the true authentic version of yourself. So Yeah.
So that's a perfect name for you then, basically. And it's actually, it's really interesting that name just kind of popped up from your unconscious or from the ether or wherever it came from.
Yes.
And it is so perfect for what you're doing. When you think about that moment where someone asks you that question and it just popped up, how do you explain that now? Seeing as we're about to talk about intuition, and that seems like it was a very intuitive thing. Like where might it have come from? I suppose is the question.
I mean, I can't take credit for it. I feel like ideas are given to us if we're open to them. Wow. And I mean, we were literally at a bar having drinks when someone asked me that. So I wasn't in like I hadn't just meditated, or I wasn't, thinking about business names. It just was like, oh yeah, that sounds fun. And I think a lot of times intuition and creativity, it just comes up when you're having fun, and it's on the tail end of just having a good time and being open to whoever or whatever drops these things down to us.
Yeah. Like I think a big part of the intuitive creative process, whatever you want to call it, is that when these things pop up, we are open to receiving them, and we don't just explain them away. And I think a lot of the time people kind of distort or end up resisting their intuition without even knowing it, because these ideas are always just being given to us. They're always popping up if we're open to receive. But a lot of the time we might just try and explain them away, or we try and rationalize them, or we overanalyze and that kind of stuff. So just to open this up a little bit, let's go to this idea that you've just shared, which is that, these ideas are basically given to us from somewhere. Some people might say that's the unconscious. Some people might say it's like a higher power or whatever. The first part of the question, I guess, is where do you think they do come from? If that's not asking you to repeat yourself a little. And secondly, how can we be more open to receiving these kind of things and tapping into our intuition?
Yeah. So I'm like you. I've heard it called a million different things. I often, just for simplicity, refer to it as the big creativity cloud in the sky. Because I think you can very easily get into, I think creativity is very intertwined with spirituality. So then you might say it comes from God, or it might come from, I don't know. I like to say the creativity cloud in the sky, because it's neutral. I think we can all picture a cloud, but there's clearly something up there or out there or in here or wherever that feeds us, right? Because I think when we have those moments of insight or just aha moments, it's definitely dropped in or revealed, maybe even a better word. It's not like, oh, I found it, because I think it's kind of like you said, the tendency is to use our brain to get there. And, we're in the logical mindset, especially in Western culture, right? Like everything's logical and everything has to compute, make sense. And I always like to tell people, creativity and intuition, it actually begins when we get out of the mind space and get into the body. So this is why a lot of times you'll have insights when you're first waking up in the morning, or in the middle of the night, or in the shower. It's when the mind relaxes, then your body opens up to receive. And so I always say, you ask how can we get into that? I think one of the best ways is to just move. If you're stuck on, we're on your desk and you're slouched and your head hurts because you're thinking so hard. Get up, do some hip circles, do some yoga stretches. We carry a lot of creativity in our hips, actually. So just kind of letting those relax, letting your hips open up. But anything, on walks, I go for a walk daily, and some of my best ideas come when I'm walking, because again, you're in the body, out of the mind. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love everything you just said, and I totally agree with it. So for me, the reason that a lot of people struggle with creativity and intuition is because they're too caught up in their heads, like you just said. They're trying to process everything rationally. They're trying to force everything through the assumptions that they already carry, through their ego, through the ideas they already have, blah, blah, blah. And when you try and force everything through what you already think you know, then you can't flow with life and what it has to teach you. And so when you do get in your body, like you're doing yoga or going for a walk or you're dancing around your living room like a maniac, whatever it is, that gets you out of your head. And then you're in this place you were talking about where you're kind of ready to receive. So for me, that dichotomy of either forcing or flowing comes back to another theme that runs throughout the podcast and all these things I rant about everywhere. I rant about things, which is either wholeness or fragmentation. So fragmentation is just this kind of illusory state of disconnection that we have because of the way we identify and see ourselves as being separate from everything else. Wholeness is the natural state of being connected to everything and, you know, the big cloud in the sky and spirituality and all these things. When we're fragmented, that's when we try and force everything because we get attached to this state of fragmentation. Wholeness is when we're actually flowing with our natural drives towards a sense of connection with everything else. And so in terms of intuition and the big cloud in the sky, is it fair to say that the more we align ourselves with this drive that we all have towards wholeness, the more we can tune into our intuition and discover or find, or whatever word you want to use, these things that are waiting basically to be expressed in the world? So it's a big question, maybe.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Oh yeah, no, I think that's why, you know, yoga is so valuable for me personally and for a lot of others. Because it's getting out of your ego mind and getting out of the dichotomy and just connecting to something bigger. And I love that. You know, I think so many religions and people try to put a name on, you know, what are we connecting to? We need to name it. We need to put it in a box. We need to capture it. And I think there's something really beautiful. Not that that's bad, but I think there's something really beautiful about just accepting it as this mystery and just accepting it as something that you want to connect with, and that you know you're going to be more supported if you connect to it. You're going to be more whole, more yourself. And it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to have a label. There's a million ways to connect to it, but it is, I think, an essential part of our human existence.
Yeah. Wow. So there's a few things there that have like cracked this open for me. So the first thing is, like, I love yoga as well. Like, yoga is one of the most important things in my life. And the reason it's so important is at the end of a yoga session, you get this feeling of dissolution. So, you know, you're lying in corpse pose and you just kind of melt away, like your senses turn inwards and all that ego bullshit and fragmentation, it just melts away. You see that it's nothing. And in that moment, you are connected or reconnected to the flow. And that flow, the whole, whatever you want to call it, that is probably one of the most real experiences you can get as a human being, if not the most real experience. And yoga is not the only way into it. There's billions of ways. But for me, like, yoga is the thing that does it. But what you realize in that moment of dissolution at the end of the session, or even as you're going through the session, to be honest, is that it's not about making conceptual sense of life. It's not about putting a label on everything, because all those labels and concepts, they disappear in that moment. And so it's just about feeling and being connected to the flow itself, which it's you and it's life. There's no distinction between the two in those moments.
Right.
And so what you just said about labels and people trying to make sense of everything is so true. Like, actually, all you need to know is that tuning into wholeness and the intuition, whatever you want to call it, it works. But you can only get there by trusting life. That's how I've found it. Like, you have to trust, because, you know, we're so used to trying to conceptualize everything and rationalize everything and blah, blah, blah. That actually is kind of a lack of trust, and it's unreal in that sense. And so trust and intuition are kind of inherently linked. So is there anything, I don't know, that you might want to add there?
Yeah, no, totally. I was actually, so I teach abstract art as a form of personal development.
Wow.
I do workshops and stuff around that. And one of the biggest themes is trust.
Wow.
And
Yeah. Wow.
it's actually really
Wow.
fascinating to see, I'll say, okay, grab some paint and smear it on or scribble around. And more times than not, people really have this like deer in the headlights look. They're like, well, what do you mean? Like, how do you want me to scribble it on there? How, what color should, and there's this big moment of watching people, break free of just overanalyzing, overthinking, comparing what other people are doing, right? It's not going to be perfect. Worrying about being perfect, that's a big one too. And if they can move past that, there's so much freedom that, gosh, even just taking a Sharpie and scribbling, I've seen people cry from that because we're so conditioned, I think, by society and how we're raised, all of these things, that we're conditioned to not make a mistake. And we're conditioned that if you're going to do art, it needs to be supreme. It needs to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, you're not creative or you're not an artist. So you have all of these people walking around being told and believing that they're not creative or they're not, I just don't have that, Well, actually, we're all born with it. And it's just as you've said, it's a essential piece of being human. And all it takes is trusting yourself and trusting this flow, this something that's bigger than you to move through you. And a lot of it's getting out of the way, just letting it move through you. And so bringing it back to like abstract art, just smearing it on the page and letting it be enough, not judging it, not having to label it or understand it, but practicing letting that trust muscle lead and letting that ambiguity just be what it is. Because I don't think, we're never going to understand truly what creativity or intuition or spirituality or any of this is. But that doesn't mean it's not important. It's essential, and I think it's highly important. And I think a lot of people miss out on that because they can't explain it, so they reject it. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's all about trust at the end of the day.
Yeah. Where do you think this need to explain everything comes from? So I know that's a big question, but what are the mechanics of that? Because it's true, so many people, it seems, are just control freaks. They're trying to control every little detail of their lives. They're trying to force everything through their egos and through the plans that they've come up with because of the ego and blah, blah, blah. And they're living in a way, in general, that is the exact opposite of what you just said about this process of creating abstract art. But that process, because it involves letting go and trust and all these things, that's very real. And so the way that a lot of people are living is actually very unreal, which is causing, then a lot of issues probably because you need reality to feel good, I think, in terms if you say that reality is wholeness. So in general, what kind of things do you think are causing people to, lean towards control freakery and trying to explain everything and blah, 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 blah?
Yeah, I think fear is definitely at the root of it. I actually was doing a very deep journaling session the other day with myself, and I was reflecting on like some times in my life where I felt most rejected, and it's always around the topic we're on. I've had some big rejection on my beliefs for spirituality and creativity, and I came to realize that people reject what they don't understand, and that doesn't necessarily mean they were rejecting me. But people reject what they don't understand or what they don't know because it's scary. It's scary to them. And I think there's no doubt that religion is like one of the number one reasons for war all throughout history. Because people have opposing sides, but no one actually understands what's going on. We have big beliefs, but it's, if you don't understand it, anything new is to be feared, right? AI is big in the news right now. And people, oh gosh, that's scary. Well, it is. It's exciting. It's also scary because we don't know. And anything that's unknown or that we can't put in a box is scary because people they're coming from their ego mind, their logic mind. And once again, you can't access or understand creativity or intuition from that part of the mind. Maybe a little, like there's a little science out there, but ultimately it's an experience in your body. And in Western culture, we're taught, stay in the mind. We kind of push our emotions aside. We push our body aside even. We have horrible, especially here in America, horrible eating habits and all that. And yet that's the divinity. Our divinity is in our emotions. It's in our mind too, but it's in our body and our emotions and our mind. And so, again, the body holds a lot of fear too. So it's doing things like walking or yoga or even making art and just doing these things that help you release that fear slowly over time and embrace that trust muscle and and just try to trust it. I mean, you can't explain it. That's kind of that's why this is such a great conversation, right? Because you can't actually ever explain it. You have to experience it.
Yeah, that's it. It's a leap of faith because you can spend your whole life explaining it to people, and only if they, kind of try it out for themselves and start taking these steps forward will they experience it, and they're like, oh, okay, this is actually how life is. Do you know what I mean? It's not just something that's in your head. When you were talking, it reminded me of the Jesus thing where he says the truth will set you free. I always think the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off and it will make you miserable. And the reason for that is
I like that.
the reason for that is the truth obviously shows you where you've been fooling yourself. It shows you where your identity is not real, where your identity is just a cage basically for all of these emotions like shame and guilt and trauma that you want to hide from yourself, even though on the other side of those things you just have this flow and this bliss and all the things that we're talking about. So do you think some of the resistance to kind of going with the flow and doing these things like abstract art or whatever it is where there's no conceptual sense is because people are actually scared of the truth? That's how I see it these days. I think the creative process, if you're going with it and you're trusting the process, it's going to reveal things about you and life that your identity is not necessarily ready for. I think we're always ready for it, the real version of us, because, that's wholeness and blah, blah, blah. But the identity that is keeping us from wholeness is not ready for that. And I think that the fear ultimately that you're talking about is the fear of the truth, always.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. And I think people aren't always ready to face the truth. Some of the workshops I lead, oftentimes we start with, we get into our bodies and then we do some journaling to get into the emotions. And then we move into the art piece, the doing. And a lot of times, I'll ask a question in the journaling, like, what's your biggest fear or something like that. And some people are open to it. They dive right in. They have big emotional breakthroughs, stuff comes up and out. And then there's always a couple that, my biggest fear is cheese or something, and you can tell they're just not willing to go there. Yes. Yeah. And I think then you kind of get into this whole, every soul's on their own journey. And if they're not ready, they're not ready. But I do believe we all have a choice. We can choose to ignore the truth of who we are, or we can dive right in and look it in the face. And it is scary and it is hard. And, you will probably face rejection and, just all sorts of stuff. But
yeah.
I also believe that's why you're here. Like, you're not here to just be stagnant. You're here to grow and become the person you were meant to become. So, which again goes back to the essence of the Sparkling Hippie. So,
yeah. And in terms of that, expanding and growing and becoming the version of you that you're supposed to be, or that you could be, or however you want to say it. Again, it comes back to two things that we've talked about. So the first thing is that this real stuff is just out there already in the big cloud in the sky or wherever, waiting to be discovered and to be brought into, material existence or whatever you want to call it. The second thing is that the process of allowing that to happen involves trust. So when we were talking earlier about, at the very start of the conversation about, how these ideas are just out there ready to be received and so on and so forth, do you think that applies to the real or realist version of ourselves as well?
Yes.
And so,
yeah.
So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I haven't quite like pulled it down. Speaking of creativity, but I always get this it's like a fuzzy. It's coming, but it's like a fuzzy triangle in my mind of authenticity, creativity, and intuition. I believe one points to the other. Yeah. I believe that if you focus on creativity, you're going to enhance your intuition. You're also going to enhance your authenticity. Yeah. If you focus on intuition, the same vice versa. You're going to enhance your creativity. You're going to enhance your authenticity. So they all three go together. They're all three, in my opinion, it's what we're here to do. If you're not being your full authentic self, are you really being? No, you're a facade. You're fake. The opposite of authenticity is fake. And I just feel like so many people just walk around with these masks and these layers, and sometimes they're so thick I don't think they even realize who they are for themselves.
It's true.
And probably not. And it's a lifelong journey. But I believe that when we tune in to intuition, creativity, that wholeness, it's all connected. Like just tuning into that place where the mind stops and you can just be or feel or whatever. That's where these layers start to melt off and you start to find your true essence, which is the most magnetic form of who you are and who you're meant to be. And again, we can talk about things like fear gets in the way, and I think overanalyzing, overthinking, we often cut off that flow with the mind, and yet what we're really searching for, the answer to what we're really wanting, it's below the mind. It's all there. I mean, I don't know. I get very passionate about this, as you can tell.
Me too. Like, this is awesome. So it's the real path is always there. This is how I see it. The real path is just the path towards wholeness. Whatever you can do in a given moment that is going to be moving you towards wholeness, that is real. And whatever is going to lead you the other direction to fragmentation, disconnection, separation, blah, 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 that's unreal. And you're right. Like, a lot of people, they go through this process of basically becoming shame driven for whatever reason by life. So, the people who normally get the blame are parents or teachers or society, whatever it is, some external body will make people feel ashamed. And when they're ashamed, they start to disown the parts of themselves that have become shamed. And so once that's happened, that's when they put the mask on. And for a lot of people, they start to believe that they are the mask, and they wear the mask for so long that they forget that they're wearing it. And that ultimately blocks them from this natural drive towards wholeness, and it creates the shadow self and all this kind of stuff. And it ultimately just causes all kinds of issues the more we cling to it. But the real self never goes anywhere. This is what I believe, right? I think what's real is always real. You can't add to it. You can't subtract from it. Infinity times infinity is still infinity. Infinity take away infinity is still infinity. Wholeness is just always there, no matter what. And it's about the way that we perceive life and ourselves, the world, and reality, and the way that we're attached to those perceptions and how they distort our interpretation of what's possible in life and what life even is, and blah, blah, blah. So that's me rambling about that. But the question was going to be, even though that real path never goes anywhere. Do you think that this process of discoverability we talked about earlier in the conversation always means that we'll discover the same thing? So this is kind of a weird question maybe, but ultimately what I'm saying is, when we are in this process of discovering our real selves, are we bound by just one expression of that in a kind of deterministic way, predetermined way? Or are there a kind of infinite ways for each of us that real self can be expressed? I don't know if that's too much of a curveball, but do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at like a soul on the soul level, it's just as you said at first, who you are is who you are, period. And I think the soul of who you are does not change that. And that's the piece of us that's connected to each other, to whole, all, right? Everything.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And that being said, that piece is always, what we can connect to and what we can find, but we're also human beings and we're here in the earthly form, and we do have personality traits and our backgrounds and our culture and how we were raised and our experiences. All of those very much come into play, and they're not bad. I feel like a lot of times in spirituality, we just tend to almost feel like, oh yeah, all of those things are bad. Ego is bad. Well, it can be, but we need the ego as well, because that is our personality selves, and that informs the expression of the soul. So it was a very interesting question you asked, but I think you're always going to get back to, I think all of us, if we connect to wholeness, we're going to find the same thing, right? We're going to find, the essence of what it is to be alive. But we can each do that in different ways, like we already said, like, it might be through yoga. Sometimes for me, it's through art. Other times it's through a walk. And what comes out of seeking that wholeness is going to be different for everyone. And it's going to be different for any one person at any given different times in their life. It'll be different, different experiences you're going through. So yeah. I kind of, I don't know if I answered your question, but
it's perfect. So I 100% agree. So wholeness is just wholeness, right? Like, obviously that's maybe too simplistic a way of saying it, but wholeness has to be the same for everyone because it's just whole. So you can't change it basically because it is what it is. But when we're here in these human bodies, living out these human lives, and we've got all these different contingent things going on, like you said, culture and things we've been through and blah, 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 blah. It ultimately just means that we're all expressing the same thing to different degrees and in different ways. And every person that you meet basically is just a different experience or a different path back into the same thing. And I think, the people we bring into our lives, we kind of attract them based on what we're currently going through, like in terms of our own fragmentation and the patterns we're working through and blah, blah, blah. And we will kind of find people or bring people that are going to allow us and who we are going to allow to move towards more wholeness. If we can go with the trust and the process that we mentioned. If we don't go with the trust and we resist, that's when we kind of get these toxic relationships where people are just feeding each other's egos and their own egos, and it leads to drama and blah, blah, blah. But the trusting ultimately is about allowing ourselves and the people in our lives to move towards this wholeness and to express it in the way that they need to. So we've gone on a bit of a tangent, I guess, but in terms of intuition and all that kind of stuff, how does intuition help us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, which is mainly what we've been talking about, but I guess with other people as well in the world around us, in relation to all this stuff about wholeness and everything?
Yeah. I mean, how doesn't it make everything better? I'm like, there's just so many reasons. Yeah, well, I think that your intuition, in my opinion, is higher guidance. It's guidance from a 360-degree view, where maybe your mind and your earthly experiences may only be like a 45-degree view. So I think anytime you're bringing, the voice of God, or whatever you want to call it, intuition, anytime you're bringing that into play, you're going to, if you trust it, you open yourself up to much greater opportunities, much greater fulfillment. I think bringing that into relationships, I mean, I don't know, it's almost allowing you to think through the lens of God or wholeness. And a lot of times from that perspective, you see people with a lot more empathy or a lot more compassion. You can also just see things with a lot more perspective, and that intuition, that gut knowing, or that instinct, those things are going to only serve you, to protect you, to guide you, to make everything better. I think it's our number one skill as humans. I think it's our biggest superpower, and it's waste if you're not tapping into it, because I think it's absolutely our highest skill as humans.
I love what you just said. So far, I guess the main theme of this conversation has been like, if we can trust life and trust our intuition and move towards wholeness and blah blah blah, then the real version of who we are is going to get a chance to emerge. But actually, like you just said, you can apply this to relationships with other people. And so if we're taking the assumption or accepting the truth that we as individuals are completely whole at all times, and we can keep moving towards that, then actually when we look at other people and we see other people, we can see them in the same way. So if I'm always whole, so are you. If I'm always whole, so is, I don't know, whoever's some person that might be annoying me on a day-to-day basis. But like, that annoyance only really persists, this hypothetical annoyance, I'm not thinking of anyone, but this annoyance only really exists because I am not seeing them as being whole. I'm not seeing them as being real. And I'm not trusting that whatever is going on is actually allowing the real version of them to be discovered or to emerge as well. Because for every human being on the planet, that process is always unfolding. And if you can remember that and see things through that lens, like you just said, through the eyes of wholeness or God or whatever, you see people clearly, and you see life clearly, and you see yourself clearly. And it's that whole thing that the truth will set you free, and you can keep moving and flowing and doing what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So many good themes in there.
Yeah, I suppose the underlying theme of all this is the trust thing. So just to kind of bring all this together, because obviously we've pulled apart a lot of different threads here, and they're all interlinked and connected, but the trust thing seems to me at least to be the guiding force, or whatever you want to call it. So how can people, I guess, become more trusting if they're finding it hard to kind of trust the process of life and all the things we talked about? Maybe they're control freak. What are some practical things, I guess, so that this comes a bit more down to earth? What are some practical things that people can do based on your work and what you've learned to develop that trust and kind of flow in this way we're talking about?
I think that's a great question. What came to mind was at first was just, intuitive expression. Well, what does that mean? A lot of different practical things to bring that down even further. Turn on some music and dance, and just let it move through you. Not counting steps, not doing a TikTok routine, but just letting the melodies move through you, and letting your body respond as it wants to. That's going to help develop that trust muscle. Also, I mean, it sounds simple and silly, but please try it. Take a Sharpie and scribble on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Just letting things be messy and trusting that, you know, your hand's going to go where it needs to go. You could also do your non-dominant hand, put the marker in your non-dominant hand and just let it slowly meander around the page. That's a good trust muscle. I mean, I've got all sorts of art exercises that I could share, but I feel like those two are very, very simple. And then one more I would throw in that I know anyone and everyone can do, and that's journaling. Journaling is a huge practice of mine, and I recommend it to everyone. I think everyone should keep a journal. But again, not approaching it with, oh, did I spell that right? Is my grammar right? Is my handwriting okay? Will someone read this? But letting all of that go and letting this notebook become your sacred place for authentic expression and not judging yourself. And it takes time. You're not just gonna, you know, the first day you journal be fine, but letting it just be your place where you dump, you know, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you worried about? And just dumping it out on the page. I feel like, that is such a great, just a healthy process for one, but also over time, if you get up every morning and write for even 15 minutes and just pour things out, let it come out of you. Guarantee you within a month, you will be receiving insight. You will receive guidance. You'll be, more self-aware, surprised. I've journaled almost every morning for years and years and years, and it never ceases to surprise me. It continues to allow me to trust myself and to trust the flow of life. So there's my practical tools: scribbling, what did I say? Journaling, and intuitive movement. Just letting music move you. So those are three very, very practical tips.
I love it. And I love that you mentioned judgment as well, because really judgment is the main problem, right? The reason people don't trust is because they're judging. The reason people try and force everything is because they're judging, blah, blah, blah. Judgment is the issue. And so if you can create some container in your life to just get out of that state of judgment and to just experience life in the present moment as it is in your body instead of your head, then obviously that trust muscle is going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And then you can get all these benefits that we've been alluding to in this powerful conversation. We've been talking for 40 minutes, which is the time we set aside. Have you got any final words to sum all of this up? And obviously it's a lot to sum up. We got a lot out of this conversation actually in a short time. But yeah, if you were going to sum it up, how would you do that? And I feel kind of relieved that I don't have to sum it up, so thank you for that. And also, can you let people know where they can find you, Haley Hoover, the Sparkling Hippie? Pretty please.
Yeah. I'll take the easy one first. So where to find me? I am at the Sparkling Hippie. Hippie is HIPPIE. Some people do use the Y. I don't. But I'm on Instagram, pretty active there. My website is thesparklinghippie.com. But I would love to connect with you all. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I agree. It was a very powerful conversation. So I would love to hear just what comes up for you, what questions you have. Feel free to reach out. And to sum it all up, I think at risk of sounding very sure of myself, which I am though, I truly believe that all of your life's problems, stress, strain, shame, guilt, trauma, all of your life's problems can be solved by learning to trust your intuition and leaning into the unknown, surrendering to it. It's such a beautiful, abstract thing. And yet I think so many of our problems come because we're disconnected from that, or we're afraid of it, or whatever. So I would just encourage you, sweet listener, to maybe just try one of these very practical things that we've talked about. Maybe just lean in and even just dip your toe in, and I guarantee you'll find some some relief and some fulfillment there. So
Wow.
that's how I would sum it up.
That was awesome. So Haley, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing all this stuff. And
thank you so much for having me, Ollie. It's been a real pleasure today.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much.